complexity and the cost of regulatory processes is really mind-boggling in some instances. I would talk about securing property rights and increasing access to credit as a second one. And the third might be improving ICT systems and connectivity. But of course, this brings me to the point about the private sector. I think consultation with the private sector is a crucial aspect of the reform process. And my co-panelist has just made that point, that in fact government doesn't systematically consult with the private sector in a systematic fashion. Again, I'm a relative newcomer, so please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I was struck in any case, when having conversations with the British business, that saying that they really lack the fora or the opportunity to speak their minds and express themselves to government. So maybe this is also something that we can think about. What are the fora? How does the private sector voice come across? How is it heard? So it does seem to me that the private sector, the consultation with the private sector is a crucial aspect of the reform process, and without understanding the private sector's concerns and the barriers that prevent them from starting, operating, and growing their businesses, no government can claim to set up a comprehensive reform agenda that will make a real difference to businesses. And perhaps my final point is on monitoring reforms, and I think it's incredibly encouraging just quite how much the Minister of Trade and Industry has invested in this area. He is clearly a champion. He speaks incredibly convincingly about this subject matter, and I do think he's making great progress. We need to monitor that, and I know the government has started to do that. But if I may give you one example, again from the perspective of British businesses, those that I have spoken to in the last 2 weeks, I would say, tell me that the visa on arrival is not a reality. And we've had a few examples where British businesses had very senior people arrive at the airport, say in Lagos, and those people were made to wait an hour and a half, and then they were told, well, they have to have exactly the right amount in dollars, not in pounds. And then one very senior official told me that he had been given a receipt for a different amount of what he had paid. So these kind of anecdotal examples actually really harm the country, because these stories spread like wildfire and people talk about them, and it affects a country's reputation. So I would argue that we can't afford to get those wrong, and that there's no second chance to make a first impression. The visa on arrival has got to work, and I would say that's a low-hanging fruit. So let's get those rights and focus on those. That said, I don't want to end on a negative note. I think fantastic things are happening. There is some differentiation across the different metrics that the World Bank has. Some of them are actually Nigeria is doing quite well on. So let's not be entirely negative. The market is amazing, as we were reminded by Yewande. So there are opportunities, but I think we've got to seize them and to act on them now, because other countries in West Africa are. And what we have to be alive to is that there is a risk of Nigeria being leapfrogged by these other countries if we do not act decisively now and follow up on our policies with implementation, monitoring, constant improvement, and feedback mechanisms which involve the private sector.